Good afternoon, everybody. First, let me make a confession that even though I have been a student of philosophy and teaching philosophy for almost 40 years now, I have never ventured into the field of philosophy of education. And so it has always been my area of interest and never had been my area of competence. And still I accepted the invitation of Professor Dhankar because I wanted to know about the current scenario and also to be enlightened by the stalwarts in the field. And though my title of my presentation is very high-sounding, I don't think that I have been able to make much headway in the direction because when I started writing the paper, I found that there are so many layers that it is very difficult for me to pick out one particular strand and then come to a conclusion. And so I thought that at least let me problematize the situation and let's have some discussion so that we can really arrive at some conclusions. And the focus of this presentation is the policy framework of higher education as reflected in the 12th five-year plan approach paper of Ministry of Human Resource Development. And in the very first plenary lecture, Professor Anthony O'Hare has raised the question that whether state should at all intervene in education or not. But our situation is such that it is only by the intervention of state that we could actually make some sort of provision for education for all, and therefore all of us who are in this education sector, very often we are surprised by the policy papers which are sent down to the universities to be implemented. And I was very, very disturbed by and also intrigued by the statement of this MHRD approach paper for the 12th five-year plan, which is the plan period which is now going on. And that's why I thought that let me bring it out into the public forum so that we can really understand that what was behind this particular way of formulating the texts, why there are so many inconsistencies and omissions, and why they have actually shifted from the values that has been enshrined in the Constitution, but in a very covert way. And so I thought that it would be a good thing to bring it into light or bring it to your notice that how actually this policy paper has been conceived. And even though they are using the same words, but we find that the meaning of the words, the concepts have changed. And so we find that once again Indian government has set the triple objectives of access and expansion, equity and inclusion, and quality and excellence before all the stakeholders of higher education. And another interesting thing is that when I'm saying about all the stakeholders, when there are, meetings about higher education, there was never any representation from secondary education or primary education. And we always think that those who are planning, they really have some ideas about the ground realities, but when the policies are framed, many of those things are not really reflected in the text of the policy papers. So it is, right from the beginning that we find that there has been the talk of this equity and access and quality. And another thing that I must tell you that I'm a bit uneasy because, I know that Azim Premji University is engaged primarily with school education, and in their mission statement, they have said that they are going to bring about social change. And since I am all the time related or engaged in higher education, that's why I would not have been, very authentic if I had talked about school education, and that's why I have concentrated on higher education policy frame. And of course, there will be occasional references to primary and secondary education because policy planning of the different stages of education cannot be kept completely insulated. Now, true to the vocation of a philosopher, I started looking at the definitions of the concepts which have been used in the framework. And I found that there have been very palpable shifts from what was meant by equality and quality in the past than what is being hinted at in this paper. And as you know, that our constitutional fathers like Ambedkar and Nehru and others were guided by the liberal ideology of a social democratic republic. And Susie has pointed out in the morning in her presentation that liberal ideology or humanism is not enough. But definitely we have to say that humanism is necessary. And so we were guaranteed of this type of human approach in our constitution. And in the preamble of our constitution, we found that equality of status and opportunity has been granted to all. And sections on fundamental rights, so articles 12 to 35, guarantee freedom in respect of cultural and educational rights, which were not absolute rights, but were justiciable rights. And Article 45 actually declared that the state shall endeavor to provide early childhood care and education for all children until they complete the age of 6 years. And in Article 51K, included in the section of fundamental duties, the Constitution says that it shall be the duty of every citizen of India who is a parent or guardian to provide opportunities for education to his child, or as the case may be, ward between the age of 6 and 14 years. That this spirit has finally matured in the Right to Education Act of 2009, which has been instituted as a claim right, which states that every child from 6 to 14 years of age has a right to free and compulsory education in neighborhood school, and that private schools must take in 25% of their class strength from weaker sections and disadvantaged groups who will be sponsored by the government. I will come back to this point later, but this is the right that has been granted by the Government of India in 2009 through this Right to Education Act. And now, if we look carefully at different formulations of the principle of equality as has been enshrined in our constitution, we find actually there are two sides of it right from the beginning. And following Andhra Bete's terminology, I would like to call these sides. One is the meritarian side, and another is the compensatory side. The first guarantees equal treatment and non-discrimination to all, whereas the second recommends additional compensatory measures for backward communities, which were historically oppressed and deprived. Though Nehru and Ambedkar considered this compensatory principle of equality as essential but a temporary measure of removing century-old inequalities, we find that the first Education Commission, which was led by D.S. Kothari between 1964 and 66, highlighted the Mediterranean aspect by saying that education is supposed to cultivate all available talents and ensure progressive equality of opportunity to all sections of population. So I would like to draw your attention to this, that to ensure progressive equality of opportunity and to oppose the achievement of social position by any other criteria except individual effort and talent. Now, for implementing this principle of equal educational opportunity to all, massive expansion of educational institutions was necessary, and it was also felt that a common syllabus be developed and introduced so that the standard of education be the same all over the country. Traditionally, you know that in Indian society, formal education was not meant for all. So after independence, to give educational access to all, schools, colleges, and universities were built so that learners coming from all strata of the society have access to education. Unfortunately, we find that the recommendations of Education Commission could not be properly implemented due to stiff opposition from the upper caste and class leadership, both in politics and also in the bureaucracy. The only acceptable form of equal educational opportunity that we find was a free-run state school of elementary education and its expansion. And in a paper published in EPW that Sadhna Saxena has written in 2012, that further cementing the two-tier system, what emerged were government-run free schools for the backward and subordinate people, and an elite private system for the powerful. So the alternatives now amount to this, that either you accept charity, and you know, when you get the charity, there you cannot be the choosers, or you buy what you need. But side by side, we find that to implement the vision of the Education Commission, central government has initiated many schemes like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, that means, education for all, and then Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, that is National Secondary Education Program, and then Rashtriya Uchchata Shiksha Abhiyan, or RUSA, that is National Higher Education Program, to solve the problems of expansion and access. Yet overall expansion patterns took widely divergent paths, resulting in inequality, imbalance, and unevenness. And in many cases, equality of opportunity was confused with equality of results. And without, you know, reworking imaginatively the situation and the curriculum and the infrastructure, what we find that this confusion often led to the lowering of standards in the form of dumbing down of curriculum and lowering of standard of evaluation to maintain the status quo with respect to the percentage of passing in public examinations. And then in the name of giving handicaps to the educationally backward and otherwise able students, seats have been reserved, but you know, genuine empowerment has never been given. And we find that in all stages of education, including higher education, this sometimes the better performance and achievements have been ignored in the name of reservation. And so in 1986, in keeping with the expectation of India participating in the global economy and to dynamically handle the imperatives emerging out of a rapid technological revolution, the government revamped the national policy of education. And being embarrassed with the failure to implement the principle of equality of educational opportunity, this national policy of education conceived the equity principle in a different way. The government of India announced that the new policy will lay special emphasis on the removal of disparities and to equalize educational opportunity by attending to the specific needs of those who have been denied equality so far. And so this national educational policy recommended differential provisions for the three disadvantaged groups of Dalits, tribals, and girls. But once again, as Susie has pointed out in the morning, that the structure has never been changed, and we have never tried to change the contents, and that's why we find that all these students, they are not accepted in the system, and they are, most of the time, they are in the pressure cooker situation, and so we find that that led to depression and frustration, and sometimes suicide attempts, and also genuine cases of suicides. So consequently, we find that here, that in the focus, which was, once the quality education for all, in this national education program, actually, this attention has shifted to the quality education for some. But I don't think that that is something which has to be done, because we can only have progressive equality of opportunity for all sections of population, and India being such a vast country, we cannot actually have these measures implemented at a time. And so that was in the 80s, and in the decade of 90s, we saw that once again there is a conscious turn against the ideal of social justice and restructuring the Indian education system by arbitrarily borrowing from neoliberal educational paradigm. Now the rhetoric changes to quality and ascertaining or attaining international benchmark. So in operationalizing this national policy of education guidelines, the government of India implemented education reforms in tune with the conditions laid down by global actors like World Bank. And at this point, at the level of primary education, World Bank initiated a specific time-bound intervention program, which is known as DPP, that means District Primary Education Program, which actually marginalized the equality opportunity agenda. And many have written on this, and I know that Professor Dhankar has also written on this DPP. And its aim was clearly to reduce dropout rate and gender disparity in achievement and enrollment, but was not committed to creation of equal educational opportunity and did not aim for universalization at all. And against this backdrop, I will now concentrate on the 12th plan approach paper. In the very executive summary of the approach paper, the government has enumerated the challenges that they would have to meet during this 12th five-year plan period. The document reports that access to higher education is still less than the minimal international threshold levels. Previously, actually, we had some national policy guidelines, but now it's always being compared with international threshold levels. And distribution of institutions is skewed. Enrollment in public universities is largely concentrated in the conventional disciplines. whereas in the private self-financed institutions, the student enrollment is overwhelmingly in the market-driven disciplines. Exceptions apart, majority of our higher education institutions perform poorly in the area of quality on a relative global scale. This was the statement of the approach paper, and hence it is natural that the 12th five-year plan is projected to maximize the output or outcome of access, equity, and quality, meeting the international benchmark. Now, by introducing innovative approaches, so there were three goals or three targets. The first was access, and so let me see that how they have really defined access and how they want to approach the problems related to access. That by introducing innovative approaches to access, the Government of India aims at raising the general enrollment ratio in higher education by the end of the 12th five-year plan to 23.5%. That is a straight 10% increase over the 11th five-year plan achievement. In order to achieve this goal, the government wants to introduce new models of public-private partnership in higher education, supported and incentivized by well-defined policies, norms, and monitoring mechanisms. Many think that this will not be a good move, but not all private trusts are run with a profit motive, and so only those who consider education as industries or business, they run their institutes with a profit motive, and therefore their approach is different. But public-private partnership necessarily may not lead to grave problems. But the fact of the matter is this, that even after initiating this type of private-public partnership in education, the poor tend to pay for substandard education, whether state or private. And neither state nor society seems to really care about the quality of their education. In the face of an acute shortage of good schools for the poor and the palpable hostility of privileged schools to their inclusion, the notion of choice underlying their policies is not only absurd, but also makes a mockery of their education. And that's why Right to Education Act hasn't been able to make, much headway. In principle, on paper, that's very good, but that problems are still there. And besides, if we look at the Foreign University Bill, which has not yet been passed in the Parliament, then, and if it is any indication, then we don't hope to see much monitoring in respect of the operation of the institutes not aided by the government. And when these, many of these private institutions, they offered self-financing revenue-generating courses, and they often also diluted the quality and led to the perpetuation of inequity. And in the sphere of equity, the objective of the 12th five-year plan is to eliminate gender disparities and to significantly reduce urban, rural, interregional, and intersocial group disparities. Besides, the approach paper is committed to promote equity in all disciplines of general and technical and professional education. However, it becomes apparent that commitment to technical and professional education is much greater, as always, when it is declared in the very next sentence that the 12th five-year plan shall aim at correcting the skewed growth of technical and professional education in recent years. And the plan should also focus on improving the accessibility of marginal groups to courses in emerging and employment-oriented areas, including technical and professional education. So this is about equity. And for promotion of quality, it has been said that promotion of quality would be through a greater focus on performance, curricular reforms, leading to regular revision of upgrading of curricula, introduction of semester system, choice-based credit system, examination reforms, better human resource management, schemes to promote high-quality research, and technology-assisted monitoring mechanism. National science experimentation facilities, particularly in the cutting-edge areas, will be set up as inter-university centers and university-housed networking center to provide international quality research support to all researchers and PG students. And the very next sentence asserts a fine balance between the market-oriented professional education and liberal higher education should be the hallmark of such initiatives. But we don't find that any element of liberal higher education is being mentioned in this text. While expanding on the idea of quality and excellence, the approach paper states, very few Indian institutions have global recognition in terms of being centers of excellence in their field. It is essential that these islands of excellence be nourished, if possible, extended. There is a need to ensure that in widening the base of higher education, the apex must not be allowed to slip down. However, to be politically correct, or maybe due to the habit of pledging equality, in the very next paragraph we find, at the same time, it is erroneous to focus exclusively on these islands of excellence in order to raise levels of excellence in the system. The burden of public policy should be on deepening this excellence to other institutions with some potential, which can be supported to join this league. But as you know, the ground reality is totally different, and the resources and distribution of resources, that is also very unequal in the higher education sector, and the central universities and IITs and IIMs and state universities get funds and grants differentially, and so it is very difficult to maintain the base with this sort of say resource management. Now, many are afraid of the inegalitarian effects of this type of policy determination. In the hope of participating in the knowledge economy, Indian government is blindly following the norms set by international powers without critically evaluating its consequences in the national education scene. Whilst elitist policymakers often talk about the trickling down effect of quality education, egalitarians are always making an issue of the number of people left behind and the increasing inequalities. I'm not going to enter into this controversy now. I think there is a deeper philosophical issue lurking behind this debate that relates to the conception of education itself and also the aim of education. Should we look at education as a good in itself, or should we say that it is good for its consequences, or should we say, like Plato's justice, it is both good in itself and good for its consequences? In the policy paper, we find that education is being treated as something which is good for its consequences, and it has been given a totally instrumental value, and that is evident from the approach paper once again. I quote, "Higher education is about promoting excellence in more ways than one. It is an instrument of upward mobility through cultivation of excellence for national economy. Excellence of workforce is a prerequisite of sustained growth. And for humankind, excellence is a must for extending the frontiers of knowledge and cultivation of values." So at the individual level, education is the means of upward mobility and upward social mobility, and at the national level, it is for sustained growth of the country's economy. And therefore, it is no wonder that knowledge and value that have been mentioned in the paper are also, in keeping with these requirements. And commodification and objectification of knowledge is something which are, surreptitiously being encouraged. And it has also been mentioned that academics should contribute to and be accountable for corporate profitability, and students are to be tutored to be consumers of hypermobile but essentially passive transferable skills. Now, it is universally accepted that higher education is not meant for all, but it is a matter of choice. But whether to pursue higher education or not, that should not be forced upon anyone. But here we find the situation is such that people come to higher education because there's no job opportunity and because scholarships are available for pursuing MPhil or PhD degrees. And the participation criterion in higher education should be ability, or nobody today mentions the word merit. That is anathema, that is politically incorrect. But if actually this admission is not in accordance to ability, then we find that students are really very disadvantaged. And so each should be able to cultivate one's talent according to one's ability, and individual effort or merit should be counted as the criterion of access. And this is, I think, is a possible meeting point of both the democratic and the elitist group, because both can concede that one's fortune can be determined by one's abilities, talents, and efforts in relation to the needs, values, and desires of the individual and also of the society. Now, significant differences in power and success can be justified by the presumption that everyone has an equal or reasonable chance of succeeding by virtue of individual merit. Now, the RUSA statement, that is the National Higher Education Program statement, that is once again palpably clear that what actually these policymakers are aiming at. It has been said that it would be a lost opportunity if we don't take the advantage of the dividend that in 2020, the average age of an adult Indian will be 29 years, as opposed to much higher age in other countries. And it is said that herein lies the significance of higher education. We must strive to prepare an educated and productive workforce through a concerted effort to improve the quality and relevance of higher education. Improvement of teaching learning quality is necessary in order to produce employable and competitive graduates, postgraduates, and PhDs. And so we find that most of the time, university system is being criticized for producing unemployable graduates. And we find that everybody lamenting that even after spending so much on higher education, why none of our universities appear in the list of top 200 universities, world universities. And so this is the statement of, higher education program. And here also we find that education is being looked at, or education is being offered for its instrumental value. Though we want to have, principle of equal opportunity, we have to admit that everyone has not been born equal. Then what is to become of those less fortunate in the context of these arbitrary conditions of inborn ability? That is the question which has been raised time and again. And here, actually, I would like to refer to some philosophers. For example, according to Rawls's difference principle of justice, the fortunate should not be subjected to leveling equality measures, and all members of society can potentially benefit from nurturing those with extraordinary ability. He writes that those who have been favored by nature, whoever they may be, whatever they are, may gain from their good fortune only on terms that improve the situation of those who have lost out. But the question is that why should the meritorious at all care for the less fortunate? Now, here I would like to quote from Amartya Sen, and Sen says that a compassionate being who is interested to reduce the total suffering and injustice in the world would act to strike a social balance the moment he or she realizes that it lies in his or her power to make some difference in the world. Now, if actually we make caring as a virtue, then only we can think of having this sort of compassionate being. If caring is relegated only to the manner of teaching and learning, then we would never be able to have this sort of person who would really have this kind of compassionate disposition. And similarly, we see that in Patanjali's Mahabhashya, Patanjali, is a great commentator on, Panini's Bhakkarana or Panini's grammar, and he writes in his Mahabhashya that there should be comradeship or sakhya among knowers. And sakhya, this term etymologically means being together in knowing. So it has been said that though all have eyes and ears, not all are equal in mental speed. Some are like shallow pond and some deep enough for bathing. But through the virtues of friendliness and moral readiness to help others in a society where cognitive excellence is unequally distributed, we are actually in the position to ensure equal opportunities for others. And so the virtues of this shareability that is demanded by this particular framework. And so I think that when government is talking about this, there should be a fine balance between the market-oriented professional education and liberal higher education. The overarching structure should be the liberal education, and within that liberal frame, we may have this professional education and not the other way round, because in India, traditionally, self-realization has been taken as the supreme virtue, and education is, if education is to help us in achieving that end, then we have to have a liberal education framework. And on the other hand, if we have the professional education framework, there will always be more emphasis on competition than cooperation. And besides, we find that in the National Focus Group, that aims of education have been specified in this way, that children should be able to cultivate, students should be able to cultivate scientific temper and also to inculcate unassailable values of humanity. And education must facilitate creativity, and it must be a continuous process of self-discovery, and there should be, a holistic approach between means and end, and values and virtues should be a part of education system. And there it has been specifically mentioned that ways of life other than one's own must be respected, And literary and artistic pursuits are as much part of the epistemic enterprise as seeking knowledge through laboratory experiments that should be remembered. And we should not forget that there are numerous ways to learn about the world, and we should not place greater value to theory over practice and to natural sciences over art and information over knowledge. And if ideally education is supposed to encourage students to analyze and evaluate their experience, to doubt, to question, to investigate, in other words, to be inquisitive and to think independently, then we need to have this liberal ideology. And if education is seen as a liberating process, that then it cannot be, embedded within that professional academic education framework. And so, even though, as I said, that as Susie has pointed out, that we have to rework the entire educational infrastructure imaginatively, but we must have this overarching liberal ideological framework to actually to proceed to have our democratic missions and democratic visions realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that paper, which brought us back to something we haven't addressed at all during the course of this conference, that is the state and the state's role in education, which is very, very important in India, and I presume is very important elsewhere in the world as well. Questions, comments, responses?
Hello, ma'am. You have used this sentence. In which context? I want the clarification. Higher or the better performance, or ignored due to the reservations. In which context, in India especially, where there is so much of unjust, ascribed status is there, where ascribed inequality is there. So, I don't know, what is your, in which context did you use this sentence, whole sentence, and justification for this sentence? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for unveiling our issues and challenges of post-independent educational scenario of India. This is just two reflections. One thing, if you want to ensure quality and follow the Commission's directives, we need to have sufficient investment in education. So we compare with India, other nations like Finland, where they have 5 crore people, where Karnataka itself, we have 5 crore people here. And then they have per capita income, it would be more than $50,000, where what's the scenario in India. I think this is one of the major problem with the Indian system, where we don't invest much on education. And number two, any society, if you look at in the world, developed through educational thought and sustained by education thought, we have a reverse in India where except education people, all other people are involved in the policy making of education. So where we are. So we have a long way to go that education institution should determine the destiny and direction of the society in India. Just simple thought.
Hi. I have 2-3 questions. First question is, your talk seems to be very broad. There's a very broad narrative. I was wondering, there also at the same time, there are 2 different registers you're talking about. There is school education and there is university education. Can we really talk about it in the same level? Can we really discuss the question of equality and, let's say, what you call elitism in the same level in terms of school education or university education? Don't they really have different purposes? Although I'm not sure what those different purposes would be, and can we really make this distinction? But don't we really need to think about, is there a distinction or there not? No, there's no distinction. Second is, I get the impression that you are trying to build this argument that there is some kind of a problem with what you call the neoliberal model of education. But if we look at, I mean, we hardly have private universities. It's mostly state-dominated, and I'm talking about higher education. How can we really pinpoint the blame there? I mean, I'm not saying there are valid points to be raised, especially about, let's say, very instrumental view of education, and there is a dominant idea of education which seems to be gaining ground. But aren't there other problems too? What about the question of, let's say, centralization, over-centralization? What about the question of autonomy of the universities? Aren't the problems to be traced in those directions also? Third is just a small clarificatory question. What do we really mean by when we say for-profit education? For example, as far as I know, I mean, there are no for-profit institutions in India. They're not allowed by law. So what do we really, because it's always, I have this question in mind because people keep on saying, for-profit educational institutions. We don't have for-profit educational institution. Having higher fees in a college or university doesn't necessarily mean it's for-profit. If its expenses are higher and it's not getting any funding from the government, they have to charge higher fees. It doesn't make it for-profit. So what do we really mean by for-profit? Thanks.
Yes, while highlighting this very, very unequal scenario, what I wanted to say that in some places, sometimes, it has been found that, there may be just only 10 seats for a particular program. And then you will have to have, say, how much? It is 27, 20, 30. Then 3 seats reserved at least for this SC, ST, OBC and categories. And there we find that sometimes it so happens that there are no takers, but still those seats cannot be filled up. And also there is another problem that in the entrance examinations, if they don't qualify, or even if they get a 0, they can really be admitted within the system, and later on they face all sorts of problems. And but if actually we asked that why should then they must be made to sit for these entrance examinations, it has been said that just to have some sort of make the list amongst those, say, reserved categories, and not to have a sort of competition with the general students. So here we find that when there is, scarcity of opportunities, even then we had to leave these seats unfilled because there were no takers. And that's what I said, that it is going against. If we were allowed to fill up those seats when actually no takers are available, then it would have been better. Some other students might have got the opportunity of entering into this education system. And then your questions, your comments, I agree entirely that our budgetary provision is not adequate. We, in most of the countries, budget for defense is much more than budget for education, and ours is really very small, and it needs to be improved. And but that is not that may be a major drawback, but that is not the only reason. There is the lack of goodwill of implementing the policies, and also this power politics is also playing a big role here. And then in the school education and higher education, the question, yes, I have pointed out that at the level of school education, definitely this access and equity means something different, because I pointed out right at the beginning that when we are really aiming at, say, 100% literacy, and when we are trying to bring everybody to school, and at least, we are talking about giving quality education to all. In the higher education sector, nobody is ever thinking that there should be 100% admission in the higher education sector. And I have already pointed out that neoliberal model of education is not necessarily bad. I have said that there are institutions which are really offering education in the right spirit. But even if you say that there are no institutions which are considering themselves as business houses, we have instances of many such institutions where it's not the question of getting or not getting the government grant, but we know that whatever fees or whatever payments they are taking from the students, that is not being returned to the students. So even if you are saying, I don't know whether it is forbidden by law, because I have said that there was not much monitoring in that section. And nowadays you will find that these educational institutions are giving advertisements that we have professional managers in our schools to look after the problems of students, just like in corporate houses. And therefore, there are institutions which work for profit, even though you think that there exists none. And definitely, this autonomy of the universities, it's something which must be there, but for that reason, if too much of autonomy is granted, then, there will not be any parity. Within that framework, within the broad framework of the policy, every university should have autonomy, but if we say that, because universities here are not, very few universities are private universities. These are all state-run universities, and there we have to have, some parity in the policy. And that's why, even this university, I think, had to procure, say, 22F permission under the clause 22F before the university really could, say, offer degree to the students. And if they are to have any grant from the government ever, then they will have to have some sort of recognition under section 12B. And therefore, within this broad parameter, we will have to think about autonomy. We cannot really give license to the universities in the name of autonomy, because then there will be all sorts of inequalities coming up once over again. That's my view. Even if we talk about autonomy, that doesn't mean that there will not be any sort of restrictions. And that's my view. But in this Foreign University Bill, we find that this provision has been waived. And if that bill is made into a legislation, maybe we will have completely autonomous universities. We don't know.